Hi and welcome to episode 2 of the SAM Conversations. I am Manya Rastogi and today we'll be discussing the ongoing US-Israel war against Iran as it enters its third month. Joining me is Commodore C Uday Bhaskar, one of the India's foremost strategic affairs expert and leading voice on geopolitics and foreign policy. He has served over 37 years of service in the Indian Navy, and currently he serves as the director of the Society for Policy Studies in New Delhi and has previously headed major think tanks including the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis and the National Maritime Foundation. Sir, it's a privilege to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me to join you.
Should we begin with the questions, sir?
Please.
Sure. Sir, despite sustained escalation, neither Iran nor Israel appears to be pursuing a classical decisive military victory. Would you argue that this conflict is fundamentally about altering deterrence equations and regional hierarchy rather than outright military success?
Yes, if you look at the genesis of this war, what the United States has called as epic fury, it began on the 28th of February, the last day in February. And now we are in the third month. And there has been no definitive military outcome, meaning the United States has not won this war militarily to the extent that Iran has been forced to capitulate. On the other side, Iran has demonstrated an extraordinary degree of resilience, but it has not been able to alter the tactical situation, meaning it's been subjected to enormous aerial bombardment both by Israel and the United States. Currently, the US Navy has blockaded Iranian ports, and Iran is on the defensive. Its economy is in shambles, and the people are undergoing extraordinary hardship. So there's been no outcome. The objective of any war, any military intervention is a political objective. And yes, this war did not begin in isolation. You recall in 2025, Israel had carried out an attack on Iran. And at that time, the reason given was that they wanted to completely destroy Iran's nuclear capability. The anxiety that Iran was trying to acquire a nuclear weapon. And this is at one level paradoxical, ironical, but a reflection of real politics, that Israel has nuclear weapons, but the United States and the allies accept an Israel with nuclear weapons. But they are unable to consider that Iran could have a nuclear enrichment program, because Iran has repeatedly said that we are not pursuing the weapon, but we want our rights as a non-nuclear weapon state that has signed the NPT. So that's the background. So you're right about the current stalemate, that there is no clarity. And the consequence of this war is on the whole world, particularly those in the global south, countries that are dependent on the Straits of Hormuz, both for hydrocarbons, that is energy, and the general trade routes, from the Hormuz, the Persian Gulf towards the Indian Ocean. You can see the impact in countries like India. We know what is happening to the common citizen in terms of the price of gas cylinders. And we are seeing the kind of cost that the Indian oil companies are paying to keep the price of diesel and petrol at the pre-28th February level. So there is a global impact on human security. And as of now, there is no clarity about how the next few days are going to proceed, because US President Donald Trump has been changing the goalposts ever so often. Manya?
Yes, sir. Sir, as you mentioned, the impact of the war on the global South countries, especially India. So my next question would simply be dwelling around India's primarily. So it is that India today is simultaneously investing in the Chabahar port in Iran, is strengthening defense ties with Israel, and deepening a strategic cooperation with the US and the Gulf monarchies. In the context of the current crisis, Is New Delhi's multi-alignment strategy becoming increasingly difficult to sustain? What do you think, sir?
Yeah, I think the word I would use is it's becoming increasingly complex. Meaning, as you rightly pointed out, India has got a partnership, a robust partnership with the United States. It also has a very, very important security partnership with Israel. You will recall that Prime Minister Modi had visited Israel just 2 days before the war began, epic fury, in the end of February. Concurrently, India also has a robust partnership with countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And traditionally, it had what I might call as a very, very important, stable partnership with Iran over the decades from 1979 onwards, when we had the revolution there and the emergence of Ayatollah Khomeini first and the clerical regime. So to that extent, India had what you might call as the multi-aligned policy. But in recent months, it's becoming both difficult and complex because in the perception of the region, India has leaned, or India's orientation is more towards the United States and Israel. You'll remember that India was not able to condemn, even in diplomatic protocols, the assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei soon after epic fury began. Subsequently, India even took some time, it was hesitant to sympathize and offer condolences for the Iranian sailors who had died when a US submarine had attacked the Iranian ship Dina. So these are some of the indicators that India is seen to be more oriented or leaning towards the US and Israel. And that in turn has raised some questions about India's credibility, which till recently was seen as a non-aligned nation that did not take any sides, but was yet able to project itself as an important voice, both for peace and for contributing towards the cessation of hostilities in any part of the world. I mean, that was India's profile. That has currently now, I would say, been diluted. And therefore, there is a challenge for India. It has to look after its own energy security and the well-being of its citizens, 1.4 billion Indians. And at the same time, the United States and Iran are locked in a very, very difficult position as far as the Hormuz is concerned, in terms of international law, customary practice, and the fact that today the Hormuz is blocked and no ships are transiting. So India, like other countries, is paying a very heavy price. So you're right, India's engagement is difficult, is complex, and there is no clarity about how Iran and the United States are going to proceed over the next few days. Manya?
Thank you for your response, sir. Going on to the next question. Sir, even after sustained US military involvement and deployment across the Gulf, the continuous conflict has expanded geographically from Gaza to Lebanon to Red Sea and Hormuz. Does this reveal the limits of American deterrence in West Asia today? What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think the way in which this war has unfolded very tragically, with a lot of destruction and death, many deaths in the thousands across the very geographies that you mentioned, Gaza, starting with October 7th, which in many ways is the precursor to what we are seeing today. Subsequently, the US-Israel military action against Iran, and then the way in which Israel has accorded unto itself the right to attack Lebanon. So as a result, what we are now seeing is that the Iranian response, which was not expected by both the US and Israel, as we can now make out, has in a way created enormous anxiety and insecurity among the US allies, such as Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain. And this has demonstrated that till recently, till the Iranian response, the general belief and perception was that the American security umbrella, which was being provided to the Gulf countries and the allies, was considered to be completely impregnable, meaning that the assurance given by the United States is that with US protection, the allies will not be attacked or they will not have any degradation of their domestic security. That assurance has now been stood on its head. If you look at the US bases in the region, in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, and Bahrain, and the attacks that have taken place, it has shown, number one, the ability of Iran to respond in an offensive manner, use their own missiles and drones. And on the other side, the flip side is the inability of the American defense system, whether it is the missile shield or the early warning, have not been able to protect in a credible way the assets of the United States and the domestic nations involved, US partners like Saudi, UAE. And that has caused a complete, I would say, question mark. It has cast or raised a question mark on the credibility of the United States as a security partner and the ability of the US to use its military to impose deterrence, meaning that Iran will not attack or Iran will not be able to attack, or if it attacks, it will be blunted or foiled. All three have been, in a way, stood on their head. So in that sense, yes, I think America's own profile has had an adverse kind of impact in terms of how the region now sees the US umbrella.
Yes, sir.
Vanya?
Now, adding on to the same thing, while Washington remains militarily consumed by the conflict, China has largely stayed away from the direct confrontation while continuing its economic engagement with Iran and the Gulf. Is Beijing quietly emerging as a strategic beneficiary of this prolonged crisis? What view do you have on this, sir?
I would say that if you look at the big picture, today, in terms of global geopolitics, there is a certain rivalry between the United States, which is the number one power, what is called as the current hegemon, and China is number two, which is aspiring to equal the United States or perhaps even overtake. This is an aspiration for China to be counted as a major global power in the first instance, as an equal of the United States, and subsequently, everyone agrees that China would like to be right on top as the number one power. And China knows that in the next 10 to 15 years, it's expected to become the world's number one GDP. And the United States will be a close second. And by the way, in the same hierarchy, it is expected that India will be a distant third, if we don't count the European Union, because it's a conglomerate of many countries. So this is the likely geopolitical, or at least the global GDP picture. So to that extent, given the rivalry between the United States and China, any dilution of American power or American credibility in the region, in West Asia, would benefit China. So that is at the strategic level over the long term, 10 to 15 years. Immediately, China is observing how American military power is not proving to be as effective as the Americans thought it would be. So here, perhaps there are some lessons that China is drawing, both for its own understanding of how military power is to be used, and the fact that the more the United States and its military is committed to West Asia, there would be a dilution in terms of the American presence in East Asia. In, for instance, the South China Sea or the entire maritime domain from Japan right down to ASEAN. That is a critical area for China. If the American military presence is diluted because of the focus on West Asia, that would also be of benefit to China. And the last is that China now is being seen by the global South as a more responsible power. And that's very, I would say, at one level, ironical, anomalous, because China is an authoritarian state. It's a communist country. And in China, everyone agrees that power comes from the barrel of a gun. And America is a democracy. And it was expected that democracies will uphold liberal values. And the irony or the contrast is that it is the US, along with Israel, that have actually violated international law in terms of the manner in which they attacked Iran in the end of February. So today, America with President Trump is being seen as the transgressor and a country, the world's #1 power, that is not acting in a responsible manner. Whereas China is the contrast. So on all three tracks, I would say that China has emerged as a beneficiary. Manya?
Yes, sir. So, with this, we would come to the end question of today. It is, despite India's major economic and diaspora stakes in West Asia, it still remains peripheral to the region's core security negotiations. Is India at risk of being economically present but strategically absent? What do you think, sir?
Well, I would not say strategically absent because India has got a profile by way of its size. As you rightly said, there is an economic kind of weight that India brings. There is a military capability that India brings to the Indian Ocean region, particularly in the naval domain. And all of that gives India what you might call as an existential strategic weight and profile. So that remains. But where I think India has definitely been on the defensive and to an extent has been pushed to the side is in terms of the current negotiations. As we are aware, for US President Donald Trump, Pakistan and the Field Marshal Asim Munir have been the preferred so-called mediators in terms of the negotiations between the United States and Iran. Now, we also know that this has happened because President Trump has been very upset with India and Prime Minister Modi in particular, as related to Op Sindoor and the fact that President Trump had claimed that he was responsible for the ceasefire of last year. Now, we are also discussing this in the first anniversary of Op Sindoor. And it's very clear that President Donald Trump is very peeved that India did not endorse the claim or support the claim that it was he who had stopped the war last year between India and Pakistan. Whereas Pakistan very enthusiastically agreed with him, welcomed his statement, and it was Asim Munir, Field Marshal Asim Munir, who said that he endorses the candidature of President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. And he praised him in a very, very, I would say, effusive and visible manner. Now, these are the elements that contributed to India not being given any place in terms of the table when the negotiations are taking place. And it also appears that President Donald Trump has opened a line of communication with China because he's likely to go there in the middle of May. And how to bring about a cessation of hostilities and the modus vivendi to the Hormuz dilemma is also apparently being discussed with China. So as a result, if you look at the current status for India in a politico-diplomatic sense, India is not actively engaging with any of the processes that are currently underway, whether it is what is happening between US, Pakistan, and Iran, which is one triangular kind of mediation negotiation effort. And the other is that clearly there is some kind of consultation between Russia, China on the war and on the relationship with the United States. And there also is now the likelihood of a summit meeting between the United States and China. So on all counts, perhaps it would be fair to say that India, like the EU, by the way, the EU is also in a similar position because President Trump is also very, very unhappy and disappointed, as he says, with the stance or the position taken by the EU countries, Germany, France, Italy, and so on. So as a result, these are two entities, the EU as a collective and India as a major power in the region, have not been as actively engaged or involved. And I think that is, to my mind, a setback for India. Manya?
Thank you so much, sir, for the answer. Now, with this, we come to an end to this podcast. Thank you, Commodore Bhaskar, sir, for the insightful reflections and joining us today on the SAM Conversations Dialogue. And thank you to our audience for turning in. We'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.